At this time, we turn to some of John Chandler's reflections. The last class had made the whole club aspect far more real to me and more accessible to everyone. This new vision made it a little clearer how it all might work. And because of that, it was easier to trust in that concept a little more. We agreed that people with similar interests would form these groups or clubs or organizations to participate in these activities. It was also agreed that there would be no need for the workforce to supply any of the paraphernalia needed in any of these activities. Excluded from the workforce would be anything of an artistic nature or having to do with hobbies or crafts or equipment used in sporting activities. However, it would provide whatever was reasonable with regard to the materials and tools needed to fashion them. This was a huge step forward because once this was handled, we could return to the workforce itself and how it would function. Strickland suggested creating a list of headings or segments for the workforce, serving to divide it into the various fields that would supply the needed commodities and services. For instance, the food services segment of the workforce would cover everything involved in providing food for the population. There would be different subheadings which would handle everything from mass farming to food processing to food distribution. The construction/building segment would be responsible for manufacturing and maintaining all the equipment and tools necessary to build any needed structures, from homes to apartment buildings to warehouses to train stations, airports, and power plants. Communications would involve anything to do with manufacturing and maintaining computers, televisions, phones, internet cabling, satellites, etc. The entire list consisted of food services, construction/building, textiles/apparel/clothing, communications, education, electric power, law enforcement, library/historical data/record keeping, manufacturing, medical/healthcare/public health, military, parks and recreation, raw material acquisition, refined materials such as metals, woods, plastics, recycling, refuse, water and sewer, transportation/infrastructure, and disaster relief. This list was by no means definitive. It was merely our attempt to cover anything that might be deemed essential for normal everyday living. I remember someone saying, I think it was Carter, that this list would seem to require a massive workforce and questioned how this could be accomplished in any feasible practical way. Then Emma echoed something that Jay had mentioned in a previous class, that all these things were already being provided for in the present system by only a portion of the population, actually only a portion of the workforce of the population. This was evident and undeniable and eliminated any more concerns along those lines. Then Mike, whose dad was apparently employed in the banking industry, asked, so what about the sectors of the job market and economy that have to do with money? Like banking. What happens to them? Do they just get eliminated? That was a good question. We all paused and had to give this some thought. I remember after a brief silence, Strickland saying, well, what about that, class? Then I think it was Joe Bachman who finally said, yeah, well, of course. If we're eliminating money from the system, and I guess that's the whole point, right? Then yes. What do we need a banking industry for? At first glance, it seemed obvious, yet at the same time, there also appeared to be something innately wrong with that. Then Jordan commented, this gets crazier and crazier. If you get rid of the banking industry, then you'd also have to axe all of the other financial institutions like investment firms, accountants, corporations, credit card companies, insurance agencies, the Internal Revenue Service, Wall Street. In fact, anything that would fall under the category of money and finance would simply cease to exist. And what's that going to do to society as we know it, and the country, and the world? I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm thinking this is a little beyond the ability of this class to reconcile. This was jarring at the very least, and a bit sobering for everyone that such a huge, seemingly essential segment of the economy, and indeed free enterprise itself, would suddenly simply become defunct. But we had to admit it was true. It would be entirely meaningless in a non-money based society. To all of us, it seemed there must be some dire, far-reaching consequences as a result of this. How could all of those jobs being eliminated and all of those people out of work not entirely destroy the economy? Wouldn't it send unemployment figures spiraling out of control? Wouldn't it disrupt and topple an entire pillar supporting the very fabric of our lives? Wouldn't it cause a kind of huge economic, financial implosion that would, at the very least, cause a major depression, the likes of which would be hard to imagine? It made us all feel as though this whole cooperatism thing was absurd and untenable. It almost brought the project to a screeching halt. Then Patty Stanton said, "Hey, folks, this is only detrimental in a money-based system. Remember? We have to keep thinking outside of that box, outside of the rules of a money-based system. It's just like Milt said last class. We keep thinking of how these events would pan out in our present system instead of seeing it from the point of view and circumstances of the new system. Right?" This realization took a minute to sink in, but essentially, she was right. Things that would have dire consequences in the current system may not make any difference at all in the new system. This continued to be a stumbling block for us, and I remember that periodically we had to remind ourselves of this as we dove deeper into cooperatism. Under cooperatism, she continued, these job eliminations simply meant these segments of the population would now be free to either participate in other ways in the workforce or, depending on eligibility, simply retire from the workforce altogether. So what's the problem? We are all so used to our box, our money system, that the thought of eliminating jobs makes us automatically think of economic hardships, makes us think of not being able to provide for ourselves. Remember, there is no economy in cooperatism. The less people working, the better. Remember, in cooperatism, it's an advantage. That's just the opposite to the way we're used to thinking. "How can that be an advantage?" Jordan responded. "People not working means things aren't getting produced, and the quality of life, the standard of living, declines. Don't you people see this? It's so obvious." Then Julie made this great point. She said, "Well, if we're saying that jobs in cooperatism would only be positions that needed to be filled in the workforce, and that the workforce is only there to supply what we're defining as basic needs, then I can think of a lot of jobs that would no longer be jobs, if you know what I mean." We think of jobs as something someone does to earn money, right? Jobs are things we do to make a living. Well, we're saying that in cooperatism, no one has to earn a living anymore. So we've sort of redefined job to mean a position that is filled or a function that is performed in the workforce. right? A job would be something done in the workforce. Doing work in one of these clubs or organizations we've been talking about, like making your own tennis racket, is strictly voluntary, right? It's not something we would consider to be a job in an economic sense of the word. It's not something someone has to do. The only things that people have to do are the things deemed necessary in the workforce. This is what we're saying, right? I remember some students shrugging and others nodding. People were waiting to see where she was going with this. So I guess what I'm saying is we really have to change and rearrange in our brains how we're defining the word job from system to system. It has a different meaning and different connotations depending on the system we're talking about. I can see this as being a continuing point of confusion down the road. She continued, jobs in cooperativism are things that have to be done for society to function. But not everyone has to have a job in order to live because everything is free. No one has an income and no one needs an income. The only people with jobs in cooperativism are those who are, at that time in their lives, fulfilling their requirement, if you will, or putting in their fair share of time in the workforce to keep the whole system going for society in general. Everyone else basically has no job, doesn't need a job. They can spend their time as they wish. So the more automated we can make the workforce tasks, the less jobs there have to be. And this is a good thing, a positive thing in cooperativism. It actually improves everyone's quality of life. It gives people more time and freedom. However, in the money system, everyone has to have a job, excepting those fortunate enough to be independently wealthy for whatever reason, certainly not the majority. They need a job to earn income because this is the only way to supply themselves with the things they need to live. And then, once their expenses are taken care of, whatever is left over, they can use to save for retirement or purchase more frills and perks in life. So jobs are necessary for everyone, or almost everyone, and therefore there needs to be a lot more of them in a money system because everyone has to have one. Get it? But in the money system, a job does not have to serve some needed purpose. We don't need bobblehead dolls. We don't need Coca-Cola. We don't need Barbie dolls or G.I. Joes. We don't need chandeliers. But we do need those jobs for people. Do you see what I'm saying? So it seems to me there are a lot of products and services out there that won't be provided by the workforce, and therefore those businesses won't be in business anymore. So financial type institutions aren't the only business types affected by this. And the jobs associated with these various businesses will also be eliminated, right? There will be a lot less jobs and a lot fewer people working at some sort of job, at least in terms of how we define it in the money system. That doesn't mean I might not be working at something in my spare time. It just means it won't be defined as some sort of job. It'll be something I choose to do. It won't be something I have to do to earn income, which would be the money system definition. And it won't be something that needs to be done in order to support my family, nor will it likely be something we consider essential to the needs of society, like a workforce function. Although I suppose it could be something like that if I had a passion for something along those lines. Is anyone else getting what I'm talking about here? There were many people nodding, so she continued. Maybe I'll make bobbleheads or Coca-Cola for myself because I like those things. Maybe I'll get together with others who have the same interests and form one of these clubs or organizations we've been talking about, where everyone makes bobbleheads and Coca-Cola. But this will no longer be considered a job in cooperatism because I can stop doing it whenever I want without financial consequences. That's what I was searching for, without financial consequences. Yes, I'm free to stop whenever I want. Maybe I won't be adding any more bobbleheads to my collection or drinking Coca-Cola anymore, but I can stop without financial consequences. And for that matter, start up again whenever I want without needing investment capital. There would be no particular consequences either way. In a sense, that makes everyone freer, doesn't it? People were trying to absorb this, and I started to understand what she meant. I began to realize what a subtle but sophisticated point it really was, and one that was essential to keep in mind as we proceeded. I couldn't help admiring the astuteness of this observation. So, she continued, like Milt said, we have to stop thinking like we're accustomed within a money system. I've got a feeling there are going to be lots of times as we work through this when things are going to seem crazy to us, when in fact, outside of a money system, they might not be crazy at all. Like in this case, when we automatically associate job loss with financial consequences. Then Jordan LaMarche said, so if I'm following you correctly, we're saying that if the workforce only produces what is commonly needed by everyone, and that everything else is produced voluntarily by those who choose to do so because they want to, then the whole idea of business disappears, right? For what is business but someone producing a product or service for a fee? Literally, that then disappears, correct? All the little shops where you would normally go to purchase all the unessential little pleasures in life would be gone and replaced by these clubs you're talking about, where now you have to go and make your own little niceties if you want them. We will be eliminating the only thing that encourages people to produce and provide things for others: money. Let's face it, money is the only incentive for people to mass produce anything. It is the only incentive for business. And without business, nothing gets provided for the masses. Oh, sure, you're going to have this, what you call voluntary, but what I see is compulsory workforce producing the needed things, as you say. But without business, mark my words, you are going to go without all of those little niceties that you're enjoying now, unless, of course, you're willing to make them yourself. And is this practical? Is this even doable? To me, the logistics involved are going to be a nightmare. It's going to be a disaster. And just how many of these niceties are you going to have to make? Realistically, 3, 5, 10, 20? I'm sure you're going to find, if you think about it, that there'll be a lot more that you wish you could just still go to the store and buy. Would you want to live in a world like that? This is insanity. We've got a system, a good system, and one that handles this for everyone. Why would you want to change it? You have no idea how good you've got it. Mark Trevor challenged this. I think, Jordan, that you're still trying to see the new system in terms of the old system, just as Milt and Patty have been saying. In terms of the present system, the new system seems so foreign and unworkable because we're trying to fit it into the old rules, the old way of life. We don't really have all the facts yet, as Jeremy said. These little niceties you speak of are going to only be desirable to a certain percentage of the population. Not everyone wants a bobblehead or Coca-Cola, using Julie's examples. It's not like every individual has a list of 200 niceties that they simply must have. Heck, even in our present system, people are limited to how many of these things they can have according to what you can afford. Think about that. It's not like everyone can just go and buy whatever they want whenever they want it. In a money system, people are limited as well. They have to pick and choose the things they really want according to their income. So maybe in cooperatism, they also have to pick and choose according to how much of their time they're willing to spend producing it. In fact, if you think about it, even in our present system, there is a trade-off in time, because time is money. Even when you purchase something, it's not just the money it costs you, it's also the time you need to spend working in order to earn that money. Think about that as well. There really is no difference. But in cooperatism, you're not restricted by money. And I'm thinking that the amount of time everyone has will increase. At least it seems that's where we're all sort of hoping this leads to. Jordan came back with, we don't know that yet. No matter how you look at it, you've got this compulsory workforce everyone has to be a part of. So you're still putting in years of your life working. And now there's no choice. You'll be doing whatever the government says you have to do, and for as long as they tell you you have to do it. At least in our system, we get to choose. You have a choice as to what you do to earn your livelihood. And depending on how successful you are, you have a chance at working far less throughout your working years and maybe retiring far earlier. So I don't really see how you think you're going to automatically have all this free time in cooperatism in this utopia of yours. They thought socialism and communism would be a utopia as well, and just take a look at how those people are living. I remember viewing people's faces at that point and seeing this made people stop and think. Milt was the first to break the silence. Yeah, he said, but the point is we don't know yet how it's all going to work in cooperatism. Maybe you're right. Maybe that's what we're trying to determine here. We haven't even talked much about how the workforce will function. We've only tried to figure out what it will and will not produce. We have yet to figure out the details and find out how many man-hours this would take to accomplish, and therefore how much of the population would need to be involved, and for how long. And as far as choice goes, maybe there will be some sort of choice as to how people fulfill their workforce commitment. We haven't determined any of that yet. And, he continued, you also imply that there will be some sort of government forcing compliance in some sort of dictatorship fashion. But keep in mind that in a money system, whether you're talking about capitalism, socialism, or communism, people are still forced into working. Maybe not at gunpoint, but the normal average citizen is still compelled to work in order to survive, unless you're lucky enough to be in the wealthy elite. That is true no matter what system you're talking about. At least in cooperatism, it seems a bit fairer. Everyone puts in their fair share, and everyone benefits. That is not true of these other systems, at least not in my mind. In cooperatism, the people would not be working for some government that is benefiting from their labor through taxes and power gain, nor are the people working for some wealthy elite or CEO or corporation getting rich off of their labor. People would be doing these things to benefit themselves as a whole. To me, that is a huge difference between cooperatism and these other systems. He added, whether it is capitalism, socialism, or communism, each of those is still money-based. It's just a question of how the money or wealth is distributed. And in each of these systems, the distribution is grossly unbalanced. There are still huge class and wealth discrepancies in all of those systems. Cooperatism seems to be an entirely different animal altogether. Maybe that's just wishful thinking. Maybe it is some sort of impossibly idealistic utopia, as you say. But that's what we're trying to determine here. And so far, there seems to be some hope, at least in my mind, that this system might be far more practical and beneficial for humanity in general than any of these other systems. I'm curious. Aren't you at least curious? There was a brief pause, and Jordan shook his head and simply said, I can already tell you how this will all turn out, but see for yourself. Knock yourselves out. Proceed. Strickland's eyebrows went up again as his eyes scanned and surveyed the reaction of the class. Then Strickland broke the silence. So Jordan asserts that we're doing away with business altogether and all of its advantages and monetary incentives. Is this true? And if so, where does that leave us? Julie has said that we need to redefine the term jobs from system to system because she has observed that it has a different meaning in each system. And that is continuing and will continue to hinder the clarity of our arguments and proposals as we proceed, unless we keep it in mind. Milt, Jeremy, and Mark seem to think that there are still unanswered questions regarding how cooperatism will work in terms of the workforce and how much time people will need to devote to it. Jordan feels the individual is going to be far more burdened than they are now due to the fact that they'll need to produce the niceties, as he puts it, themselves. He also compares cooperatism to a form of socialism or communistic utopia. Whereas Milt makes the point that those other systems are still ultimately money-based, creating the same class hierarchies and unequal distribution of wealth as does capitalism. They just do it in a theoretically different way, but are still vulnerable to all of the same problems as capitalism. Whereas cooperatism, by eliminating money altogether, will possibly not fall prey to the greed, vices, and inequalities that these other systems produce. Is that a fair assessment so far? Everyone nodded. All right then, class dismissed. Now we have a few days to ponder these questions before our next class.